Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions. If you like that, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Joining me today, we have Cameron Abbott. How you doing, Cam?
Hey, what's going on, everybody?
What's going on is today we are talking all about Jim Henson Idea Man. It's a documentary that came to Disney Plus last year. We were originally going to do an episode on it last year, but I think either myself or Cam were sick the week that we planned it. We basically just scrapped it, and then
It was when I was sick.
Other things that we were going to do. So yeah, we're circling back to it since we're here at a week between What If last week, and Skeleton Crew's not quite done yet, so we'll do that one next week. So yeah, circling back to Jim Henson Idea Man, I think especially also because we both really enjoyed the John Williams documentary that we watched back in November. So yeah, why do we pick it? Making up for a lost episode that we meant to do last year. History lesson here. Originally released May 31st, 2024. Because, this doesn't have necessarily a box office history, but we like to do a little box office history segment. The one I have for you is I want you to guess the highest grossing, like the order of Muppet movies in terms of like highest grossing. This is not adjusted for inflation, any of that kind of stuff. And I'll throw out there. So we're looking at 11 movies overall in the Muppet / Henson family of films.
Okay.
We've got the original 3 Muppet movies, the
Yes.
Muppet Movie, The Great Muppet Caper, and The Muppets Take Manhattan. We've got the 90s Muppet movies, The Muppet Christmas Carol, Muppet Treasure Island, and Muppets from Space. We've got the 2010 Muppet movies of The Muppets and Muppets Most Wanted. So that's 8 there. And then the 3 miscellaneous ones, 2 of them referenced here in this documentary, Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. And then the last one, I only pulled in because some of the awards and stuff that I call out later referenced it. Sesame Street presents Follow That Bird, the Big Bird movie. Got a theatrical release back in 1985. So yeah, those are your 11 movies. And I'll go kind of chronologically. Those are The Muppet Movie in 1979, The Great Muppet Caper 1981, Dark Crystal 1982, The Muppets Take Manhattan 1984, Follow That Bird 1985, Labyrinth 1986, Muppet Christmas Carol 1992, Muppet Treasure Island 1996, Muppets from Space 1999, The Muppets in 2011, and Muppets Most Wanted 2014. So of those, do you want to take a stab at what's the best or what's the worst of those?
Worst has to be Muppets from Space.
You'd think maybe, but no. Again, I'm going to highlight these are not adjusted for inflation. So,
That's a good point. And Muppets from Space came out in the 90s,
Yeah.
so it's going to have a higher inflated number. If we're bringing in all of, if we're just talking Muppets outside of just the Muppets movies, if we're talking that, I believe Labyrinth did the worst, didn't it?
Yeah, Labyrinth is at the bottom of the list, $13.1 million. They highlight in the documentary here that it was a bomb. It did not do well for them, but has gotten cult acclaim in the years since. But yeah, at the time,
it's crazy.
Did not do well.
It's crazy. And here's the thing, though. I was thinking about it last night as I was watching. I was like, I paused the movie and I was like, why did Labyrinth fail? And then it dawned on me. It's like, because the girl wins at the end over the guy. Maybe, I don't know, misogyny.
I don't think.
No,
it's
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was just. I don't know. Maybe it was poor marketing. I don't know.
I mean, for me, I look at it, and especially in the context of the documentary, Dark Crystal hits and is completely non-Muppets. It's more gruesome kinds of things, but it hits at the time where Jim Henson still very much height of his powers, the Muppet show very much still the most popular show on television kind of thing. Labyrinth a few years later also really relying on the more grotesque style of Muppet stuff
fair.
that is not what people were looking for.
Creature Shop, not the Muppet
Yeah.
the Muppet Company. That makes sense. I mean, you look at it and it's like, okay, I get that. And also, yeah, I guess people were like, well, I got really burned by The Dark Crystal. So if it's not a Muppet Jim Henson movie, I'm not going to go see it.
Sure.
I can see that also being like the kind of detrimental effect that Dark Crystal might have had on some audiences. I know I was a little scarred by The Dark Crystal growing up. I don't know if you had a good childhood if you weren't kind of like hurt by it or like, impacted by that movie.
Yeah.
I loved it. Loved that movie. Loved Labyrinth. Labyrinth is like an Abbott Family classic. It is a big movie for like my childhood. If I have like some people who I've known over the years who are like, yeah, I saw Labyrinth. It was all right. Or they're like, oh, I didn't like it. I'm like, okay, cool. And immediately like docked slots in my mind. Just like immediately like you were up here. Now you are down here. Cause you're not somebody who like found Labyrinth like great or phenomenal or like, and like maybe I look back and it's like, maybe there was that was around the ages.
Definitely some problematic things of Labyrinth.
Oh, for sure. 100%.
Especially when like in this documentary, they're like, yeah, Jennifer Connelly, like 14 at the time. It's like, that's weird.
That's weird. Yeah.
Like her and David Bowie. It's like, this shouldn't be this kind of relationship between such an underage girl.
To be fair, it does. I always felt like it played more into the young woman fantasy of the like timeless, older, ethereal being.
Yeah.
Like that plays up into other like works of fiction. That plays into like kind of the other thing. Like we talk about Twilight being like, dude's over 100 years old, kind of messed up. But from the female lens, it is that aspect of that fantasy of that like timeless creature taking an interest in you and like that aspect of it. So I felt like it falls into that genre of fantasy. But also at the same time, her entire point is she's not falling, like she rejects him at the end and returns to reality. And it's a very triumphant moment for her as well. Like I love that movie so much because it is that story of a young woman, like growing into her own, taking charge of herself, not making excuses for anybody else's behavior, just taking action, taking charge, and really coming into her own. And Jennifer Connelly's phenomenal in that movie. Absolutely spectacular. And like looking back on it now, like maybe there was this, like, it is around that age that I was like having like a little bit older than the first time I saw it, but it's like David Bowie all of a sudden wasn't scary. David Bowie was interesting. And it's like, was that also like a sexual awakening for Cameron? Maybe. Like, maybe that's like a sign, like, hey, I'm also into guys. I don't know. Looking back on it, might be a little like, crossing, a little bit of a crosswire there. But like, I just love also just the friends she makes along the way with these like horrid looking monstrous Muppets.
Yeah.
Hoggle is like...
Hoggle, Ludo, yeah.
Hoggle, Ludo, a lot of them. Like, I love all of them. They're just such a fantastic, like, nonsense crew of misbegotten, terrible things that just, that her compassion and her kindness are what brings the best out of them. And it does play into that. Like, I just really love Labyrinth a lot.
Sure. Moviegoers in 1986 did not.
Yeah, they did not. Also, like 1986 is a different time than like 1981, 82.
Sure.
Like you mentioned earlier, like we're talking about like what kind of movies are coming out in 1986 are probably very different than they were in the earlier. We know they were different than in the earlier 80s.
Yeah.
So like it makes sense to me that didn't track well, and like I can see it's like you've done nothing but like been successful your entire career. All of a sudden you have like one thing that doesn't go well. Not only that, but it's like the one that you work with your son on, and like it's like you can see how much of it like family investment he put into Labyrinth as well, like with his son and like getting his son set up at the creature shop and basically being like, hey, and his son taking on like animatronics for the first time, and like creating animatronics, and it's like really, really awesome to see that. But it's like, yeah, it's really sad that people didn't take it well.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the bottom of the barrel.
Definitely,
of these 11. Do you want to try and see what's top of the list?
I mean, I have to think it's either going to be The Great Muppet Caper, because that's like the sequel to the Muppets movie. Well, I'm thinking, no, if it's the best, we're talking the best performing one, not adjusted for inflation. It's going to be the Muppet movie in 2011.
Yeah, the Muppets is the number one. with 160.4 million.
Yeah.
So that's the range we're looking at.
Adjusted for inflation, we're talking like a big jump up in that.
Again, no, there is no adjustment for inflation. So don't.
Oh,
like,
sorry.
This is all just raw numbers.
Yeah, this is all raw numbers. This is not adjusted for inflation.
So yeah, we're looking at between 160.4 million for The Muppets in 2011 and 13.1 million for Labyrinth in 1986. So everything else falls in between those two extremes. So what do you think is next there?
Like if we're talking like next from the top or next from the bottom?
Up to you.
Up to me. Next from the bottom, I would say this is where it's going to be really rough, and I think this is where we're going to be getting into like the 70s movies, like the Muppet movie here.
No, the Muppet movie, it does fine. It is not the next up from Labyrinth.
If we say Muppets from Space is next up from Labyrinth, that's very sad.
Not quite.
Not quite. Okay, so The Muppets Take Manhattan, maybe?
So I'll throw you the bone and say like, hey, yeah, this like this is not one of the Muppet trilogy, the original Muppet trilogy.
The Dark Crystal?
No.
Okay.
Let's go with the other oddball that's in here.
Oh shoot, what is the other one that you mentioned? It's shoot, you mentioned another one. What was it? It was
the Sesame Street one.
Sesame Street one. There we go.
Follow That Bird.
There we
go. Number 10 with 13.9 million.
There you go.
In 1985. So yeah, it
was it released in like 6 theaters. Like
no, I mean again, like the how much of an audience was there for a Sesame Street Big Bird movie to go out and into the theaters and see it? It was like,
well, it came out in 1995, right?
85.
85. Okay, Big Bird was bigger back then. I was going to be like 95.
Sure,
there should be Elmo should have been ahead of that.
That I don't know. But yeah, it was definitely this is one that like I forgot that this was a movie until turns out they won a Grammy for it. So like
okay,
they won a Grammy for like the original motion picture soundtrack, and I was like, oh, that this actually got like a release. All right, so peek behind the curtain. I had already kind of put this whole list together.
Gotcha.
And then came upon that one, was like, well, I got to slot that in somewhere now. So yes, it was number 10 there. Still a little bit better than Labyrinth, but not by much.
Gotcha. Okay.
So then number 9 is one that you've already called out. That you might be. I don't know if you were going to be disappointed by it, but.
The Muppet movie, or is no, that's not the Muppet movie. That one's a little bit higher. You said. Is this the Dark Crystal at this point? Nope. Dark Crystal higher.
Dark Crystal, like Dark Crystal, as they touch on in the movie, in the documentary, did fine.
Okay.
Dark Crystal in good shape.
Okay,
so, yeah,
cool. So at this point, I would say Muppets Take Manhattan, because that's another big break in between movies there for that.
Not quite to Muppets Take Manhattan yet.
Okay. Wait, did Muppets Caper do better or worse than Manhattan?
I'll give you the Great Muppet Caper does better than the Muppets Take Manhattan.
That's what I thought.
In the overall,
I remember. I'm trying to think. I'm like, I don't know if it goes Caper's like the top of that trilogy, or if Muppet Movie still beats out Caper.
Yeah.
In that case, I would say Muppets Christmas Carol.
Nope.
Okay, cool.
This is in the era of the Muppets Christmas Carol. It's in that trilogy of movies, though.
Oh, Muppets from Space.
Muppets from Space.
There we go.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yep.
I'm like, where do we get the bottom of the barrel of the '90s trilogy?
Yeah. The one from that era that I've never watched, Muppets from Space.
Neither have I. It just looked terrible.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to. We got the toys from Wendy's, and I was like, these toys are bad. Ergo, I believe the movie will be bad as well.
It was like you had a good thing going there in the '90s with the Christmas Carol. Great references, a existing story. Muppet Treasure Island, great, referencing an existing story and slotting in the Muppet characters. Why are we taking a detour from that working formula and doing Muppets from Space?
I love how we find out the actual like true reason and point of Gonzo in
Do we? Is
in
that what we
no, in
find
the
out in that?
documentary we find out Gonzo is
okay.
just a guy who's trying to do great things,
Yeah.
and he's just a wonky, cool Muppet design.
Yeah.
We didn't need him to be like, people are like, what animal is he? He's not an animal. He's just a Muppet. We didn't need it to be like, well, he's an alien. I didn't need any of that garbage.
I believe in recent years, Gonzo is a they them.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. They, them.
There you go. Yes.
What do they do to the chickens, man? What's up with that? Anyway, joking. Jokes aside.
Yeah. Then do you want to hop back up to the top of the list? See where we can go from.
Go from
there?
the top of the list. I would say after that, Muppet Christmas Carol. After that.
I'll give you the hint on this one. Think more recent in the
Oh,
vein of
Muppets
like,
Most
hey,
Wanted.
modern movies are, making the money. Yeah, Muppets Most Wanted is the number 2.
Yeah, number 2.
79.3 million in 2014. So then, what do you think is number 3? I'll say number 3, probably biggest of the classics.
Oh, biggest of the classics. I want to say Muppet Movie because I prefer it over
You'd be right. Yeah.
Okay.
Muppet Movie, number 3 with 76.6 million.
That's an insane amount of money for 1970s.
For 1979, yeah.
1979, that's an insane amount of money.
They did good with that one, and yeah, again, capitalizing on this is a year or two into the Muppet Show being the biggest show on television. So yep, it was striking while the iron was hot. Next up, we can either go down to number 4 or we can go back.
No, let's
to
go
the
down
bottom.
to number 4. I want to say Great Muppet Caper.
No, not Great
No,
Muppet Caper.
okay. So it's not going to be Muppets Take Manhattan, and that's going to be, both of those are going to be lower. Then I would say a Muppet. I'm trying to remember which did better, Treasure Island or Christmas Carol. I kind of want to say Christmas Carol because my heart says Treasure Island, but my heart's usually wrong when it comes to these. There's a reason why I never tried to pretend that I want to be a movie producer because I don't pick the right picks on these.
Sure. It is not Muppet Treasure Island.
So it's Muppet Christmas Carol.
It is not Muppet Christmas Carol.
Oh. Dark Crystal. Dark Crystal.
Dark Crystal. Number
There we go.
4. Yep.
Okay.
1982 brought in. It is a dip down to 40.5 million for the number 4 movie there.
Man, it gets real skinny on the box office for these, man.
Yeah. So the remaining 4 that we have to kind of figure out and slot into place here are chronologically The Great Muppet Caper, Muppets Take Manhattan, The Muppet Christmas Carol, and Muppet Treasure Island.
Oh. The question I now have is,
the clue I'll give you again in terms of like timeline and how money works over time, box office
then
wise.
I'm going to say at this point,
the
it's
classic trilogy is still there in the 80s versus the 90s movies.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and say that the next one down is like going down from 1 to below is going to be Muppet Treasure Island.
Muppet Treasure Island is correct. Number 5,
And then
34.3 million.
And then Muppet Christmas Carol after that.
Muppet Christmas Carol,
Yes,
number
Treasure
6,
Island
31.7 million. Yep.
There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and say Muppet Caper after that.
Yep.
And then follow that up with Muppets Take Manhattan.
Yep, indeed. Muppet Caper, 31.2 million, and the Muppets Take Manhattan, 25.5 million. Once again, that is number 1, The Muppets. Number 2, Muppets Most Wanted. Number 3, The Muppet Movie. Number 4, Dark Crystal. Number 5, Muppet Treasure Island. Number 6, The Muppet Christmas Carol. Number 7, The Great Muppet Caper. Number 8, The Muppets Take Manhattan. Number 9, Muppets from Space. Number 10, Sesame Street Presents Follow That Bird. And number 11, down at the bottom, Labyrinth. You remind me of the Babe.
What babe?
The Babe with the power.
What power?
The power of voodoo.
Hoodoo.
You do.
Remind you of what?
It's do what?
Do what?
Remind me of the Babe.
That's it. Thank you.
Yep. Fun little, breaking out the highest grossing of the Muppet films and whatnot. Anyway, back to our documentary here. The Jim Henson Idea Man here has a runtime of 1 hour and 51 minutes. In our Disney Plus original documentaries timeline of things, we had the Stan Lee documentary back in June of 2023. Followed by Madhu in March of 2024 and Tiger in April of 2024. Then we had The Beach Boys about a week before this one, May 24th, 2024. And Jim Henson Idea Man, May 31st, 2024. Followed up by music by John Williams, which we talked about back in November. And then they ended out November 29th, 2024 with Beatles 64.
I'll skip that one.
Of course you will. The roll call here. Director of this documentary, Ron Howard. Of course, with directing projects going back to 1969, including projects like Splash, Cocoon, Backdraft, Apollo 13, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, A Beautiful Mind, for which he won the Academy Award, The Da Vinci Code, Frost Nixon, Solo, A Star Wars Story, where he has appeared previously on that D Plus show. And then he was also the director of last year's film Eden. He's also a producer on the music by John Williams documentary that we talked about in November. Mm-hmm. And the writer of the documentary here is Mark Monroe, who has written on various projects back to 2006, including Icarus, Becoming Cousteau, Lucy and Desi, Jim Henson Idea Man, as well as the Beach Boys documentary that debuted a week earlier for this. So he had a busy May of last year. Our cast of characters, of course, many Muppet performers, as well as the Henson family members and various other collaborators. To its credit, it has all of the surviving Henson children make an appearance. The one who did not was John Henson, who referenced, and they highlighted him a couple times in the film, but he passed away in 2014, so he was not around anymore to be making an appearance in this one.
I'm sure he would if he was able to.
I believe so. Seemed to be in good with the family business. Some trivia here. This particular documentary, since we did not do it kind of at the time and have since had the Emmys come and go, was the winner of 5 different Primetime Emmys. It won the Outstanding Documentary or Nonfiction Special. Also won Outstanding Music Composition for Documentary Series or Special. That went to David Fleming for his original dramatic score. It won Outstanding Motion Design for Mark Thompson, Seamus Walsh, Mark Caballero, Ivan Vyarenchik, Max Strizdic, and Mono Zhao. It won Outstanding Sound Editing for a Nonfiction or Reality Program for Daniel Timmons, Jeremy S. Bloom, Ian Kymore, and Ryan Rubin. And it won Outstanding Picture Editing for a Nonfiction Program for Sierra Neal and Paul Crowder. So wanted to give them their flowers and dues. Congrats to everybody that worked on this. And then Jim Henson himself, another little guessing game for you. I've pulled some award things here. I'm just basically going to have you guess how many wins or, for many of them, it's going to be how many wins. I didn't pull full nominations. But for the Oscars, there is how many wins and or nominations do you think Jim Henson received over the course of his lifetime for his films?
I don't recall him getting many. I think they would have mentioned it in his documentary if he had won, an Academy Award. Trick question, none.
No, they do mention in the film that his short film Timepiece that they show was nominated for 1966 Best Short
that's
Subject
right.
Live Action Subjects. But yes, that was his only nomination for the Oscars. BAFTAs. How many times do you think that he won a BAFTA award?
I'm going to just go off the top of my head and say like 8.
No, only 2.
Only 2.
They won for The Muppet Show in 1978 and The Storyteller in 1992. Nominated many other times, but only 2 wins there.
Gotcha, okay.
Daytime Emmys.
Oh gosh, how many?
How many wins do you think they've got for Daytime Emmys?
Between Fraggle Rock and Sesame Street, have to be at least a dozen.
No. Fraggle Rock, not a winner of any. There are 3 wins for Sesame Street, 1974, 1976, and 1979, and 4 wins for Muppet Babies.
Muppet Babies,
1985, 86, 87, and 88. So 7 daytime Emmys overall. Primetime Emmys. How many do you think they won of the primetime Emmys?
6.
Why are my numbers different here? Because I have jotted down 5, but I only have 4 listed here, so
okay.
I don't know where one of mine disappeared. 5 wins: The Muppet Show, The Storyteller, Sesame Street 20 Years and Still Counting in 1989, and Muppet Television was a project also in 1989. I don't know where the 5th one was, or if that's just a miscounting on my part. So, and then last one, Grammys. How many Grammys do you think they won? And I'll give you I'll give you one for free. As I said, I had to go back and redo my counting of the box office stuff to include "Follow That Bird" because it won a Grammy.
Yeah. 4.
3.
3.
One for The Muppet Show in 1979. Won the Grammy for The Muppet Movie in 1980, and 1986, Follow That Bird. So lots of awards there in the Jim Henson oeuvre, and a lot of those are shared among the Jim Henson Company or his various collaborators as well. But per his IMDb, that's what we had pulled in for his records. So there we go. So that's some trivia for this. So what did you think, Cameron, of Jim Henson Idea Man here? What did you think of the documentary?
I loved it. I thought it was just absolutely fantastic. I don't know if I like it more than John Williams, but just as much, I think, if not more. Jim Henson, I think John Williams was more about learning about all the stuff that I didn't know about John Williams. This was much more, I feel, details about stuff I did know about Jim Henson. I feel like I felt like this really colored in the photo, the image I have of Jim Henson, more than redefining it the way that Music by John Williams did. Music by John Williams, yeah, it completely redefined my approach and idea of what I understood to be John Williams and his music, and really opened my eyes to the scope of his work. Jim Henson really, I think, it colored it in a lot more, getting to know more about the man, especially towards the first half of that documentary, learning much more about who he was as a person. I never really thought to myself, I really wonder what Jim Henson's ideals and philosophy were about his approach to work and his approach to creativity. Getting to see that explored and knowing, getting to hear directly from his longest time collaborators, whether it's his wife, Jane, Frank Oz, and all the people he discovered Frank Oz when Frank Oz was 17 years old. That's insane.
Yeah.
Frank Oz is from the Bay Area, from the other side of the country. It really had, I'm not gonna lie, Frank Oz now has real Roger Picorni vibes to me now.
Okay.
Especially after the 10th year 10 for Kind of Funny coming into it, and hearing Roger talk about his experience going through that process. I'm like, man, Frank Oz got real Roger Picorni energy on that one. But being discovered when you're too young to come out to work, and then graduating high school and getting a job right away to work with, a guy and I love that they kind of really explored their relationship just a little bit to kind of be it was different than everybody else's, because it was originally a father figure that then turned into a friend and a collaborator. And that's truly incredible. But I loved also just finding out the person who helped bring out he always had the inspiration to be on television and to do work like that, and then to do the work that he did. But to really learn about how meeting Jane helped him really evolve his craft, working working to make that better and better and better. And then was sad to see how things kind of like they do with a lot of successful things when somebody's driven and works across 2 continents and does that. Relationships change and deteriorate if they're not kept up. And, I think that it was very lovely that the children all had nothing but oh, it's just it just didn't work out. But didn't stop our parents from still like 100% being there for us. And like they mentioned, like he was like in one of the interviews, he mentions that he goes, well, I'm never without like one or two of my kids when I'm traveling. Like I never want to be without like at least some of them. Like, and I love that aspect of it. Like this man was a man who made work for family. Like he worked for families.
Yeah, I mean,
but he was a very non-traditional family man.
I will say like that also, that response struck me as him realizing in the moment,
oh, I don't spend that much time with my family.
I'm not a good, like, yeah, I'm not a good dad. I'm not there for my kids, but I bring some of them along with me on trips and stuff. Like it felt very much like a covering for like, that's
they mentioned when he's like going like vacation, he never stopped taking work with them.
Yeah, that's one of my big takeaways from this, and I'm a little bit in the same boat in that like I already knew a lot about Jim Henson.
Yeah,
be it because I'd studied some puppetry stuff in college, and had already kind of looked into a lot of his like pre-Muppet stuff. And I'll include this in the kind of extra credit section at the end. Defunct Land has done a great series of 6 videos on like the different eras of Jim Henson too.
I gotta check that out. Then Defunct Land. You did the one with we watched. We didn't watch it together, but I watched the ticket, like the birth
the queuing one.
The queuing one. The queue one is unbelievable.
Yeah,
in like how like fascinating the queuing system for Disney evolved.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to find out if he did like a 6-series part of Jim Henson. I gotta watch that.
It's like Jim Henson, the early years, which we see a lot of kind of here. Then it's like the Sesame Street era, the Muppets era, I think the movies. It does way more. It focuses like because it's a 6-part thing and each one's like 30 to 40 minutes, I think. This documentary very much gets to like the end and it's like, all right, Labyrinth happened. It didn't work. But then he followed it up with Fraggle Rock and Storytellers and then he died kind of thing. And it's like, oh yeah, those like we very much gloss over the last few chapters of Jim Henson's life in this. Whereas like, Fraggle Rock has a whole dedicated episode. The Muppet Babies has a whole dedicated episode.
Hells yeah, Muppet Babies rules.
And then there's an episode that's basically like Jim Henson's final hour, of course, his passing and the funeral.
And of course, then he dies because he's dumb. Like, not dumb. I shouldn't say that. He dies because he's a workaholic. Really, is what it turns out. Like what it ends up being.
Yeah,
he's a workaholic. And I think that goes into it. They really play into it. Be like, he was on our tour. He was an artist, and it's like, yeah, that was his primary focus was being creative and making stuff.
Yeah, they set up early on that like. Maybe because he comes from like the Christian Scientist background, that like medicine and like going and seeing doctors wasn't really like part of his routine. Yeah. And they talk about like, yeah, he'd be working, 6 days a week. He'd crash and just be sick on that 7th day, but then he'd get back up and go back to work and push through. And so
that's super unhealthy.
So the ultimate like passing being bacterial infection from like
strep throat,
like walking pneumonia kind of thing. It's definitely it weirdly mirrors kind of the Walt Disney-ness thing, which Walt very much died suddenly from a kind of a like his body catching up to him, basically.
Yeah, there's when you talk about people who burned the candle at both ends for like 40, 50 years of their life, they all of a sudden go quick. Yeah. It's very much falls into that line.
Yeah. The one of the things I like about this documentary, this is my second time watching it because I did watch it back when we were originally going to do it as well. I like that, like, when it introduces the timepiece thing, it very much sets up the idea that like there was always a ticking clock on Jim's life. Yeah. And we circle back to that and we see that a few times and they kind of like come back to that motif every now and then over the course. When it is like he is he's the Alexander Hamilton, like writing like nonstop, always running out of time kind of thing. He's always working, always moving from one project to the next, to try and get all of the ideas out, as if there was a knowledge that he was only going to be around for a limited time on Earth kind of thing.
Well, you see that behavior a lot from people who like lose a sibling earlier in life.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, they mentioned he lost his brother, and I was like, oh, that's crazy. But when I was looking stuff up afterwards, because like, what did he actually die from? And I looking it up and find out bacterial infection from strep throat, leading to like infection and abscesses in the lungs. And I'm like, well, what about his brother? And it's like, oh, his brother died in a car accident in the 50s.
Yeah.
So like, oh, and I'm like, oh, that hit him when he was younger.
Yeah.
Which
even that, like, that comes a little bit out of order in terms
yeah.
of like how they present it here. Like,
yeah.
they introduce like, oh, he met Jane, he started having kids and blah blah blah. But yeah, he had this drive for life, from a very young age when his brother passed away, and it's like, oh, we're rewinding the clock back, 7-8 years to when his brother died.
Yeah, and his brother dying, like, as somebody who's lost people to car accidents and other sudden things, it comes out of nowhere, and it really makes you. It really, like, losing people out of nowhere really does something to your concept of reality and what is going on around you. And so it's not uncommon that you see that sort of like drive out of people after they lose somebody close to them. That it's just all about the, it makes sense why he's like all about foundations and legacy. He has that idea that, yeah, time isn't infinite. We don't always have time on our side. And so that's definitely felt throughout it, I think. I never saw the Orson Welles interview with Jim Henson and Frank Oz.
Yeah.
That's a weird interview. I'm not surprised. Orson Welles, super weird dude, but like it starts off and it's just Orson Welles with the like longest cigar being like da 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 Jim Henson, Frank Oz, like, and it shows him, and I'm like that is wild. Like, I did not know that interview existed. Glad it does, because it's super weird and in the way only Orson Welles can do it.
Yeah.
And it's like Orson Welles delivering beautiful lines, but in like the weirdest tone. And I'm like, you brilliant writer and you weird man. Yeah, Frank Oz, getting more to know about Frank Oz, who he was. Like, I've always known Frank Oz as a director or as a producer or as a thing, and then later on being like, oh, well, he was also Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, two of my Yoda, like, all the his puppetry stuff in Star Wars alone, yeah, just like crazy, like this master puppeteer, and being like, oh yeah, by the way, he was like also like discovered by Jim Henson, and like brought out to New York to work under Jim the entire time.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
And to that, like, I appreciate that they introduce him, like, discovered, but he was, like, his parents were very serious
famous,
puppeteers. And
which meant that he did not take puppeteers.
Yeah, he was like, I can't take this seriously.
Yeah.
He, like, his version of rebelling against his parents was, I'm going to be a silly puppeteer. Love that. And yeah, I love how we get to see kind of the evolution of the Jim Henson and Frank Oz dynamic over the course of this. Obviously starting with kind of the initial like father-son-esque dynamic, because Jim is the elder statesman who's been doing this. He's been on TV for a little while, and Frank, while has also been puppeteering for a while, doesn't have that necessarily in his wheelhouse. But especially when they move into Sesame Street, and and Frank basically becomes the arm for Rolf, or I guess even before Sesame Street, but like Jim is Rolf and then Frank is the other arm, so they're always working that puppet in tandem, or that puppet in tandem, and then continuing that on with like the Bert and Ernie dynamic that the two of them really get to like showcase. And then I love that we then him
discovering. I loved him discovering Ernie's, it's Bert and Ernie. Bert is
Bert was Frank Oz.
yeah,
and he
Bert.
was
So
Jim.
his discovery of Bert's personality of like not really knowing and then being like, well, he just wants to be left alone and read a book.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I immediately saw that. I was like, felt, seen, love that.
The straight man, yeah, the Abbott and Costello-ness of them. And then I love that even continues to evolve when Jim is working on Dark Crystal and basically says, hey, do you want to direct this with me?
Yeah.
And Frank Oz has not directed anything, says why, and Jim says because it'll be better with you. Being very much like they were in the same way that we got to see that great relationship between John Williams and Steven Spielberg in the John Williams thing. Like these were two collaborators who were made for one another.
Yeah.
And getting to see their kind of relationship grow over the course of their careers together was a lot of fun.
It was also interesting to see that after their separation, Jane and Jim became more like partners. Yeah, in that aspect of it, they briefly touch on that of how like it's like, oh, isn't it? It's like it's one of those things where it's like super like an interesting dynamic of, and they mention it. It's like they were soulmates, but they just couldn't live with each other. And so all of a sudden he moves out, they separate, and then they have a way better working dynamic. And it really goes to kind of that aspect of it of like, yeah, some people just aren't meant to be around each other all the time. And like, that's totally fair. I think that you get to see that aspect of getting to see his, like also the way his son who survived and is in the documentary looks just like Jim Henson.
Yeah.
It's
Brian
eerie.
Henson. Because, and Brian Henson, we touched on, goes on to be Hoggle in Labyrinth. He would go on to direct the Muppet Christmas Carol.
Yep.
And basically, like, kind of in the post Jim Henson era, was the one that really tried to kind of like take the ball and run with it in the 90s and kind of keep Muppets alive to that degree.
Yeah.
Brian Henson out there being the creative one. Real quick, back on the Jim and Jane relationship, I wrote down the quote, the love of each other's lives who couldn't live with each other.
Oh, there you go. That's it.
Very much kind of and yeah, that's like the for lack of a better term or anything, like the dark secret of Jim Henson here is like, not the great family guy.
Yep.
Because he was so consumed with the work and constantly there. And the ideas that get floated from his kids very much being like, he thought, he thought it should just be Jane's job to take care of the kids.
Yep.
And was a traditionalist in that kind of sense or whatever, while also being the like counterculture guy of the 60s and 70s.
That's
felt odd.
But
yeah, the idea that also like, he wants to be a single and dating guy. He doesn't want to be tied down because he's constantly globetrotting and going back and forth to London and all that stuff.
I also look at that as a matter of, it's very like you see a lot of that in like first and second wave, especially like male first and second wave feminists. So men who are feminists in the first and second wave of that is still a very typical thing those men expect. So it's like, yeah, was he a feminist? Yeah, of course, he was hiring women left and right for his companies. Wrote a great, was part of a great, female empowerment film with Labyrinth, all this other stuff with it. But then you also have like, there's going to be a traditionalist aspect to him because as forward thinking as these guys are, they still have those roots and those roots are still entrenched in them. So it's like, we got married. Well, Jane, you're the mom. You got to be taking care of the kids. I'm working 6 days a week, And then when I'm the seventh day, I just want to rest, and you see that argument there. You see that argument and that kind of like that. These two people love each other dearly and like really do emotionally cling to each other. But there is that grind between the two of them. And it's very, very clear with that. To the point where also Brian was at a boarding school. I don't know, maybe it was a cool thing for that. But normally you don't send your kids off to boarding school when like things are great at home. Sort of is the idea that I have about that sort of thing when it comes to like wealthy people. So when I look at that, it's like, it's interesting that it's not considered a broken home, but it's like, it was definitely not a traditional home either. But yeah, like, yeah, no, when you look at it and you have to just kind of like admit, like, yeah, no, this guy was not the best person, in regards to husband and being a family oriented person.
It's not
Like, that's not,
I don't
that's
even
not
look at it as like
unusual.
I don't even look at it as like he wasn't the best person. It was just he prioritized work over
There you
family, and so family
And
suffers.
I think
as
for
a
me,
result.
my moral compass is like, that's not the best look way
Sure,
of doing
yeah,
things. But here's the thing: I'm 36 and I'm single and I don't have any kids, and I intend to kind of be that way for the foreseeable future. So I shouldn't be really like I'm living in a glass house throwing stones at that point, right?
yeah.
So, he prioritized work. I think it's a look at. John Williams also had to deal with that, especially after the death of his wife. Like they bring that up, like he was like a workaholic.
I highlight it in the context of in a modern sense, we might see somebody saying like, hey, I am going to try and have it all, and I am going to cut back, and I'm still going to make sure the work happens, but I am going to have all of my kids with me and travel, and we will all go to London, so we're all together, and I can spend more time with them.
Yeah.
Whereas this very much felt like, yeah, the kids didn't get to see him too much because he was always working on the shows and stuff like that.
It makes sense why they all drive them.
And I appreciate that, like, they don't sugarcoat that.
Nope.
Like, it is like, no, that's where his attention was. His attention was on making these shows happen and working with like the collaborators. It's even like you touching on like, oh, the Labyrinth being like this thing of like family. I don't look at that so much as like a empowering story of, oh, Brian is working on there as Hoggle, so much as Brian, like, desperate to spend time with his dad, does it the only way he can by becoming one of the collaborators and becoming.
I think that's seen across because all the kids join the Jim Henson company. And it's like, well, also it's another thing too. It's like it's a family company at the same time. Like they all have a place. Like, and I think that's maybe also part of it too. It's like Jim Henson's like, I'm building this company. When you're older, if you want to be a part of it, be a part of it. And all of his kids did.
Yep.
And I think that is kind of the whole thing. It's like the trade-off for the success and everything that he had was that workaholic aspect of his life. And on the level we get, 4 out of 5 kids still love him and endorse him. So, they're all part of the company on some level.
And 1 of the 5 just dead. Just dead. That's
he was before apparently, but dead.
Yeah. I'm sure John Henson also loves his father very deeply.
Very dearly.
I do love the it's something I occasionally go back and just watch just because it's out there on YouTube and stuff. The funeral that we get to see little clips of, like in here we get like all 5 of the kids around and kind of like basically like they clearly did love him, and they're are like the children of Jim Henson, so that was always just going to be a thing that is part of their lives just because of who Jim Henson was. But yeah, I love those moments where it is like all of them together.
I think also like this, you see the struggle with Jane and Jim's relationship is Jim gets home, he doesn't want to talk about work.
Yeah.
And all Jane has are ideas about work.
Yeah.
Like an interesting thing, they don't ever follow up on it, but she has like a Declaration of Independence that she makes to him. And the kids kind of talk about it a little bit, and then it's like glossed over. Nobody goes back to it. I'm like, I don't know what that was about.
They touch on it in terms of like she basically like said, hey, like the way you're treating me is not fair for this partnership, and I want my own things. I need my own things. I'm not gonna divorce you, because they touch on like she didn't believe in divorce.
She was Catholic, she didn't believe in divorce,
but it like I think that's, and they eventually kind of are legally separated a few years later. So I read the like Declaration of Independence as like sitting Jim down to say to let him know, hey, like I'm not just gonna sit here and be the doting wife and the doting mother. Like that's not
who I am.
This needs to be a
that makes sense.
I need to be more than that.
I would say the thing that I got confused by is she's not really brought up in the context of the company after that point.
Yeah, I mean that's another like part of the issue is she's also passed away a number of years ago. Yeah. So the footage we do get of her talking is all archival footage and whatnot, and they touch on the idea that where is it in my notes? When they do legally separate, she basically hands over her stake in the company, which was that like they
60-40.
They set up early on 60-40. So she basically hands over her 40% to the kids, so that they have kind of that ownership moving forward. But as they touch on, like she was always still an ardent supporter and like believer in Jim's vision. She just like kind of got effectively pushed out of the company when she had to become the stay-at-home mom while Jim went and did the globetrotting and stuff. So, yeah. But I also I like the moment. I don't remember which. I think it's Lisa of the daughters that talks about the idea that like Lisa didn't make it to Jim in time before he passed once he was in the hospital. Neither did Brian, but the mom did, and they had some sort of like coming together of peace at the end. And whatever that was is between them. Obviously, we can't really know from either of them at this point, but
he never sought for divorce, so to marry anybody else. So for all intents and purposes, for all we know, she is the great love of his life. It's just, it's like they said, they were the love of each other's lives. They just couldn't live together. It really does come down to, like, you see a lot of that in like really brilliant creative people when they are younger, like one of the kids, I think it was Lisa, who said our parents
touch on like he got married way too soon.
They got
way
said
too early.
Yeah, mom said they got married too young, like, and she was 3 years older than him.
Yeah, the mom had boyfriends before and like had lived, whereas like he was or she was very much like his first love kind of thing. So the references later on of like he wanted to be single and dating in Manhattan in the 70s or whatever it was,
80s, but
70s, 80s, wherever. That sounds about right.
Yeah,
like
you're at the height of your career, and you like. I think it was after they did I forgot what it was. It was like it's either the Muppet Show. I think it's the Muppet Show. He got the Kermit Green Lotus.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this where they tell us that he like left his family? And it's like, oh no, he doesn't do that. But okay.
Not quite. Yeah.
Not quite. Yeah. With Kermit. Oh my gosh, his Kermit Green Lotus with Kermit eyes for the headlights is so freaking hilarious.
Yeah. One of the stories I it's in here. You can see a fun version of it in the Saturday Night Live movie that came out last year.
Oh,
as well.
Yeah, you told me about it. I was
the Jim Henson, basically, like Jim Henson gets brought in to do the Saturday Night Show, but because of the SAG rules or Writers Guild rules or whatever, like the SNL staff are the only ones who can write for them. So they're not getting to write their own material. They're just there to perform. And we hear Michael O'Donoghue, the head writer of SNL in that first year, fucking hated the Muppets and
hated them so much.
And basically like which is,
he said he never wanted to write for Felt again.
Yeah. It's basically like they're both such like, they were just such strong voices of like the counterculture, like we're bucking the trend, whether it's Michael O'Donoghue and Lorne Michaels in SNL or the Henson crew going and doing the Muppet Show, like both of them realizing there's more opportunities and there's more availability for like our sensibilities of humor, but they did not mesh well at all.
Well, you mentioned like this is more of our family show, so I'm not going to go into the details about it. You told me, but like, it's messed up. O'Donoghue was like really trying to like get Jim Henson to quit.
Yeah. And it's I mean, there's trailer like from the trailer of Saturday Night Live. It's it's a clip from the movie of like the Jim Henson actor coming down and like talking to Lorne Michaels, and Lorne being like, "What's wrong?" And he's like, "They hung Big Bird from the ceiling." And then like, Michael O'Donoghue basically like cracking jokes about that. Which and yeah, if you go and watch like that first season, the obligatory Muppet sketches are never good because they didn't want to write anything fun for them, and it is also like the grotesque, Muppets. It's not the fun Sesame Street Muppets, so it is like an ugly,
Jim's not giving. They're not giving him. They're not giving Jim their best work. He's not giving them his best work.
There was a fun story I saw or I heard, sometime back, that all the way back in that era, Jim Henson and or somebody from like the Muppet team found some, pipe closet or something like that was basically just like pipes for the building there in 30 Rock, and just painted it in all sorts of like the like silly colors, and because it's a whole bunch of pipes and stuff, they make it look like the Menomina puppets or whatever. Like those,
awesome.
Like it is like the Jim Henson pipes basically is I think what they kind of refer to it as, and it like they've just been there for years and like had been forgotten about over time, and then when people kind of like refound it, they realized like, oh, this is like Jim and the the Muppet crew kind of probably had to have done that, and basically they basically like just in the time where they were disappointed and not getting to actually do what they wanted to do there, took some time and apparently painted some pipes there in 30 Rock. So, funny little stories like that. But yeah, I think that especially like the disappointment of that, I love how that gets turned into, right? Like Jim's frustrated and wants to he doesn't want to be pigeonholed for Sesame Street, because clearly like people like Michael O'Donoghue are going to be dicks about that kind of shit and not treat them, like adults and treat them seriously. So like he tries to sell the idea of the Muppet Show, and all the networks pass multiple times over, and finally they get the opportunity to go do it overseas in London, and it ends up becoming the biggest thing in the world. And the thing that like even there I'm like, man, the balls it must take to be like, hey, we're still the hottest thing on TV, but we're gonna call it after 5 years.
That's insane.
Yeah. It's like it's the like, hey, yeah, you have the creative might to do that. But it's also like, I think about,
you also let everybody know way ahead of time that like, you weren't holding back. You said on the 5th year, you're like, this is it.
To his credit, I think he had the resources that he could keep his team together and they could keep doing stuff. Because I think excuse me, I think of and it's coming back up into light because he's going to be doing a new game and whatnot. The Ken Levine after BioShock Infinite basically was like, I don't want to keep this team for Irrational Games, and basically completely downsized. And so like it's like, fuck you, man. Like you just let go a whole bunch of people who were, relying on you for that job. And then like his neck, like he's like, because I want to make smaller, intimate experiences. And then like he comes back and does Judas all these years later. It's like, you're just doing another BioShock.
Yeah, man.
Go fuck yourself, man. Like you fucked over a lot of people back then, and I've not forgotten. Whole bunch of people I'm sure have, but like
I didn't know that
that's a dick move kind of thing.
I heard that I had heard that he was going to work on smaller games. I did not know the backstory of the studio and everything. After Infinite, I did not know about that.
Well, it's because he
because he bounced.
Because he was like, I don't want to work on another BioShock Infinite level thing. So yeah, all the people that are working here at Irrational Games, I don't have need for them. So we're going to drastically downsize Irrational Games and focus on intimate projects. And it's like yeah, a lot of those people might have found other jobs at 2K or something like that at the time. They might have been like moved around, but yeah, it's still like, fuck you, man. Like that's a dick move that, okay, you want to make smaller games? Then go make smaller games, but don't fucking downsize the entire team and lay off all sorts of people for that. Anyway, big old tangent there. But that, like, I think about that kind of thing when, like, hey, we're going to walk away from this massive success that we have. Again, like Jim Henson probably was able to keep his team together and go and do Labyrinth, and they obviously do the Creature Workshop, and they keep the team kind of working on those projects and basically become like Muppets for Hire effectively. Also still doing the Sesame Street, over the years, and then going on and doing Fraggle Rock, which again, we don't like this. This very much like ramps through the last phase of his life, so we don't get like Fraggle Rock. We don't get like
we any
barely get a mention of Muppet Babies.
Yeah, Muppet Babies has one mention, and that's it. They don't even show any slides or anything from it, or like any clips or anything, which is criminal.
Criminal.
Muppet Babies rules.
The line in here for Fraggle Rock is Jim saying, "I want to do a show that stops war." Okay, and that's Fraggle Rock, and that goes on for many years. But hey, we're nearly at the end of this movie, so boom, we're gonna cut to Jim Henson died, and everybody was sad, and everybody kind of has their final memories and stuff like that. And the very quick handoff of like, and he sold it to Disney and Michael Eisner.
He tried to.
No, he did.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Muppets sold to Disney back then. Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's back in the spotlight right now because Disney announced last year at D23 or something that to make room for other things, the Muppet Vision 3D performance, or the Muppet Vision 3D ride / theater experience in Disney World is basically going to be closed down. And a lot of people are sad about that because it was like the last thing that Jim worked on. So it's basically like the end of his legacy kind of thing. So
they didn't. I looked it up real quick because I already had it pulled up on Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. They did not sell it to Disney until the sell to Disney did not happen until way later. They entered a distribution deal with like Sierra Vista, like one of their Disney's sub like push out companies. They're what is it? It's Buena Vista Home Video. That's it.
Okay. I mean, like, I know that the Muppets have been in the Disney parks for a long time.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Like,
that was 1991 under Brian Henson. They made like deals to like, they've been selling, they have like a Buena Vista video, like home video, like basically home videos went through Disney, merchandising stuff went through a lot of Disney, and also they sold a bunch of television production stuff to Disney.
Okay. Yeah. So. Yes, officially bought there in 2004.
Yep.
But they started doing the work to, and that probably was, had Jim not died abruptly.
Yes, that's the
deal
big
probably would have all been finalized back then.
That's what everybody was saying about it. Because it was they announced like, hey, we're going to be doing this deal, and it's this partnership, and we're looking at moving into that firm deal. And never did because he died. And so that ended those conversations. And instead they just kept the stuff they had already agreed to, which was like the agreements. And then like Brian, I mentioned earlier, took over the company and basically made sure that those things were executed on.
Yep.
During the Brian Henson years, kept everything going. And it wasn't until they sold the company in, I think it says here, until 1999, 2000.
Yeah.
They sold the company.
Jim Henson was negotiating with Disney in 1989 to sell the company to focus on creative projects, but the deal fell through when he passed in May 1990. And then eventually, yes, we circle back, and Walt Disney Company buys the Muppets from the Jim Henson Company, February of 2004 for $75 million. So still 20 years ago.
Yep.
Yes. Anyway. But yeah, then we get the like, I like the little touching beat in here from Frank being like, what would I say if Jim were here? Well, I'd probably say like, get back to work, because he'd be too embarrassed. But then
you're my way.
A quiet thank you, being a lovely little moment for them. Mm-hmm. And then I like the end stuff starts playing, and then we get the like, if you don't know how to end it, go out with a, because as they touch on early on, like, yeah, a lot of Jim's early stuff filled with violence.
Yep.
And explosions were, of course, a recurring bit there in the Muppets.
A la
world.
the end of sex and violence on television. Blowing up and doing that.
Yep.
Great stuff.
Trying to think if there's anything else I want to. Oh, I took a note. Like in 1958, he traveled to Europe and saw that they actually promoted and supported the arts. Yep.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he finds the most success when he gets to go overseas to make the Muppet Show years later. Love the idea that they won a local Emmy from Nixon. That was a fun little bit of trivia.
Yep.
I'd like we get to see it, over the course of the film here. The avant-garde-ness that he was really into, the experimental filmmaking that he really liked. He did a lot of stop motion stuff, and so I like in the. Again, comparing this to like the Music by John Williams documentary, I think the Music by John Williams documentary is made all the more special and beneficial from all of the like Steven Spielberg home movies that they kind of intersplice, and so we got to see like those behind the scenes intimate moments. For this documentary, I liked the creative ways that they kind of introduce certain segments, and a lot of that is done through like little stop motion bits and just little animation sequences that are just there to give you, the kind of set the stage of like, here's the chapter we're going into now. And I also like the overall framing device that they have of like this weird little box that they're in that you ultimately find out is like, oh, it's inspired by this experimental film he did called The Cube, where you could project things on all these multiple surfaces, and obviously we see them use it in that sense much throughout the film.
I'd like to think there's also an alternative universe out there where he did do the discotheques.
Sure.
And I hope they were wildly successful and didn't detract much from anything else in his life, but shout out to that.
No, that happens instead of Sesame Street.
Yeah.
We never get Sesame Street, but we get
kids never learn to count or read.
Yeah, but we get a few discotheques from Jim Henson in the late 70s.
Yeah. The guy who made the Muppets? Yeah, the guy who made the Muppets. Yeah, he built the discotheques. It's like, oh. Anyway, America's literacy rate never improved after the 70s.
Yeah.
Also, I loved how they said Sesame Street let him like explore. It's like, oh yeah, those old Sesame Street things that were like really weird.
Yeah. He got to do his experimental films through those, but with like okay, we all know the tune of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But then, going back and like watching the videos that they put on top of those things, sometimes just silly and goofy.
Yep.
Weird little stuff.
And a lot of like stop motion stuff is thrown in there. A lot of cool camera angles and like camera, like, capturing movement stuff. And it's like, yeah, no, this is an auteur's vision of how to do children's programming.
Yep. This also is a good companion piece to the like Beautiful in the Neighborhood Mr. Rogers documentary that came out a few years ago, or there were a couple of them, but those are also good little companion pieces because like they're all coming up in the same kind of boat of like, hey, yeah, like we got to be a little bit more mindful of the kinds of things we're putting on TV because kids are being very exposed to this very impressionable box. And so, yeah, maybe we don't be as violent and just shoot puppets in the head for an ad for, bacon or whatever.
The ad stuff they put in there was insane.
Yeah. The whole altar to money bit, which like even that, like there's an admiration to like realizing, okay, I'm going to do this thing I don't like of selling and selling and selling, and but because we're taking all the money in to do this, I can bring in more people to join me and do this, and I can build up this thing and this crew that we've got together and we've got going, and we can use that money to do the creative things that we want to do. It's very much the like, the Shakespeare taking money from patrons so he can make the plays that he actually wants to make and stuff like that. So yeah, shout out to that whole stuff. Shout out to the clip that we get of Kermit singing the ABCs with that little girl.
Cute.
One of those iconic ones where she keeps saying Cookie Monster,
Cookie Monster.
Cookie Monster. All right, next time Cookie Monster can come do this.
I love you.
I love you too. Just a beautiful little moment there.
Find out kind of like the beauty of like what made that original Kermit Muppet special.
Mm-hmm.
Of how it's like, yeah, it form fits to the hand so that it feels more expressive. And I'm like, that's so cool.
Yeah. The things where it's like, these are very close to him, just very physically. It's like, yeah, you are, all that's here is the hand. So like, there's just a little bit of like a quarter inch of felt between what you're doing there and this character. And also the story that he was originally kind of used to help his grieving mother.
Yep. Or his grieving mother and also his dying grandfather.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, when his grandfather was dying, he was sitting vigil for him and
telling his stories with this little puppet from his mom's coat. Yep.
Just it really speaks to who he was as a person when he was like, things were like, oh, things are really rough and stressed right now. Cool. Here's a Muppet.
Mm-hmm. I always love the reminder that the term Muppet is not quite marionette, not quite puppet. Kind of a blending of those two.
Yep.
Yeah. Any other bits here? I love that one of the people that goes to work with him, Michael Firth, left Dr. Seuss to go work on the Muppets. It's a fun little collection of people that he brought together for that stuff. The Muppets basically bring out Fozzie Bear, Gonzo the Great, and of course the breakout of Miss Piggy, literally plucked out of the chorus, as they say. Love the Rita Moreno talking heads about like the joy she would have when she could get Jim to break.
I don't have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if any of my other notes have anything. Oh, Dark Crystal being rewritten twice after it was shot. Wild.
That I did not know about that. That the fact that it was initially like recorded with like nonsense noises.
Yeah.
And people were like, "We hate this."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Okay, so we have to write a movie that the script goes along with the movements of people's mouths." Yep. And they had to rewrite it twice. And I'm like, "That's crazy and insane."
Yep.
It was done after they shot the movie. Just so bonkers.
Yep. Yeah. And shout out to that bit of like, yeah, you might not like this, but what do I care? I'm dead. in Jim's will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Jim Henson, Idea Man. All right. Let's dive into the report card. We grade from A+ to F. What do you want to give Jim Henson, Idea Man, on our grading rubric there, Cam?
I mean, I'm giving it an A+. Like, this is just such a fantastic documentary. Once again, in line, like, it did something different for me than Music by John Williams did, but it effectively made the same effect happen, which was I now have a better fundamental understanding of who this person was, the scope of their work, and really who they were as a person. I think is like, it got very well colored in. Before, where I think I had a much more kind of like, yeah, Jim Henson made the Muppets, made some cool stuff, and that's all I really know about him. He died at some point. And this was like a very much deeper dive, especially into his earlier career on television and advertising and everything. So it was very cool to find out more about him.
Yeah. I'll give it an A+ as well. I love these kinds of dives into these people who are so like creative and have obviously spawned so much stuff that we are familiar with these days. It makes me want to go back and watch the Stan Lee one as well.
I kind of wanted to as well.
That's kind of in that wheelhouse. Extra credit, other suggestions if you like this. It's a mix of Muppet things and then documentaries on Disney Plus. So the Muppets, we have The Muppets, the 2011 movie that we talked about earlier, as well as The Muppet Movie, the original, The Muppet Show, and The Muppets Mayhem, which was the one most recently that was the band kind of behind the scenes thing. Then on the documentary side of things, you have The Music by John Williams, Light and Magic, which is the documentary series on industrial light and magic. Frank and Ollie, about some of those iconic early animators, and Howard, which is the documentary on Howard Ashman, the lyricist of many, many Disney things. And then, as I said earlier, shout out to the Defunct Land series on Jim Henson. Defunct TV, Jim Henson, is a 6-part playlist that you can find, and I'll link it in the description. The episodes there are Defunct TV, The History of the First Muppet Show. The Curse of Sesame Street is episode 2. The History of The Muppet Show, episode 3. The History of Fraggle Rock. The History of Muppet Babies. And The Final Jim Henson Hour. All from about 5 years ago. A nice little 6-part series. And yeah, we're looking at between 30 and 40 minutes a piece, basically. So go check out that. Extracurriculars, anything else you watching on there on Disney Plus there, Cam?
Yeah, we're wrapping up on Skeleton Crew.
Are you caught up?
Not caught up yet. Working on getting caught up.
You were just never caught up on this show. Where are you at? Have you what episode?
Let's not get into that.
All right. So
I have not watched.
You got like 4 episodes to watch for next week?
No. Like 3.
3. You get the last 2 that you haven't watched in the next week's episode.
Yeah.
All right. I am caught up. Good episode this week. Last couple episodes been very fun, and I'm curious to see how they're going to tie everything together next week in the finale. I'm trying to think, did I watch anything else on Disney Plus? I don't think so. / I guess Hulu or anything like that. No, I don't think so. All right. That is going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. We will be back next week for Skeleton Crew, our whole season wrap up on that one. Thank you, Cam, for joining me to talk about Jim Henson Idea Man here. You can follow Cameron at revcabot.bsky.social. Anything you'll give a shout out to there, Cam?
Yeah, if you like us talking about Disney Plus stuff, we of course have upcoming this week. You'll be excited for next week's episode of That Nerdy Site Show as we talk about our top movies of this year. So get ready and be excited for that.
Indeed, yeah. You can follow me at trevorjstarkey.bsky.social. In addition to our movie of the year, which we should have Logan joining us for that. Obviously, we did our game of the year this last week. And then we also got written stuff going up on the site. It's our annual little bit of written content that we put up. I put up my personal top 20 already. I believe Cameron has been working on his, so that should be coming up on the site here in the coming days. And I also have a write-up of my favorite trophies of my favorite platinum trophies of the years. I often do. I think I'm going to have my favorite Lego sets from 2024 coming up. So still got a few more best of the year lists to come. But yeah, go check out those as some supplementary written stuff over on thatnerdysite.com. You follow all of us over at thatnerdysite.bsky.social or go to thatnerdysite.com. If you like what you heard, once again, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other. Class dismissed, and remember, it's not easy being green.